your view, does this so-called ceasefire indicate anything about a possible durable peace? Hal Kempfer, a retired Marine Corps intelligence officer and national security analyst, has a few thoughts. There's some discussion starting to develop around maybe having an integrated air defense system over western Ukraine so that you could have some more inexpensive interceptors, say, to stop the ballistic advancement and drone attacks from Russia. The European Union has it within its power, and there is some economic and fiscal asymmetry here to be able to enact that and perhaps put an end to what Vladimir Putin is doing. Does that seem like a viable or reasonable option?
The Europeans are weighing in much, much more, and it's not clear to me if the Europeans this week might really just formally take lead for working with the Ukrainians on air defense, building that air defense side in western Ukraine, maybe an air defense side over all of Ukraine if there's an actual truce put in place. And the Europeans have also talked about putting troops on the ground. What
is the overall European security architecture going to be post-Ukraine-Russia peace? If there isn't some kind of relatively speedy peace, you could be looking at additional imperialist notions on the part of Vladimir Putin, who seems to have already intimated that that's really what this is about, maybe possibly annexing northern Kazakhstan at some point. Belarus is really already in the control of the Russians. And then, of course, Ukraine. China might say, if the West is not willing to try to end this war, because it is within its power to do that, then I'm going to annex Taiwan.
Everyone is looking at what will happen here in Ukraine, and no one more so than China. If they see weakness in the West, if they see a weakness of resolve, they're going to look at what they're going to do with Taiwan, which right now they've been building up very quickly to do some sort of massive amphibious assault on Taiwan, or possibly a blockade to put the U.S. and other nations in a very difficult situation.
The tariff war has significantly affected crude oil prices, particularly Urals, which is the primary type of oil that Russia sells. That is coming in way below what, of course, Russia was predicting. So the crippling sanctions that are still in place by all of the West, combined with now a reduction in Ural crude prices to this $51 per barrel, that could be crippling to Russia's economy when it already is just a fraction of the EU, and certainly on a global scale cannot compete. So is some of this discussion about the EU not being in a position to economically thwart Russia, that doesn't seem to stand up?
Europe has the financial capability. By the way, one of the things in the background is the preponderance of the $300 billion in seized Russian assets. Well, about $220 billion of those are actually held in Europe. And Europe could, without the U.S. involved, decide to use those assets to basically support Ukraine. That's been something that's been suggested by a number of major European countries, talking about it's time to go from freeze to seize, if you will, with those assets and to use them to support the Ukrainian war effort. So Europe has the means to support Ukraine. What they don't have is they don't quite have the defense industrial base across Europe to really replicate what the United States can do.
There's even evidence that Russia may want to or may already have some of Iran's enriched uranium, or may take over their enriched uranium stockpile. And in that case, you can't extricate one discussion from the other. And the United States may have to, in its negotiations, figure out which is more important: solidifying some sort of deal around Iran's nuclear capabilities, or using leverage to try to get Russia to end the war.
You have Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, all working together. That pretty much spans a good chunk of the globe. And then if you really want to reach out, you can say, well, what about Venezuela and Cuba? Yeah, very close allies of all the aforementioned, working with them closely. So what you end up having is a global axis, if you will, that is working in concert. And if you can't just look at one thing in isolation. All of these things are interconnected. All these things are interrelated.
And just this Friday, Iran was seeking support from Russia over a possible deal with Washington on Iran's nuclear future, which the U.S. wants to completely limit.